Okay, hi, welcome back, everybody. I'm sure people are going to be trickling in a bit. Just like to welcome back Malaika. I'm really excited to have Claire Oakley, the director, with us. So welcome and thanks for being
with us. Hi.
Hi.
Oh, yeah.
I've just, I think that was my third viewing, actually. It was really great now to watch your pieces kind of directly before. I thought there was some really nice kind of tie-ins and themes that kind of, I had in my mind afterwards. I just going to start. Can I just wonder if you could talk about I guess how this came into being. This is your first feature film. So just wondering about the kind of the process, the writing process, and it feels to me like the kind of exploration of the kind of subconscious, unconscious desire. It has like this real kind of dreamlike quality as well. And I guess with the setting and the liminal spaces of the sea, but also this kind of caravan park that's not supposed to be inhabited. It's a temporary space. I wonder how much of that was kind of a lot of the imagery. I wonder how much was there at the beginning.
Thank you for watching it, and thanks to everyone that's tuning in. The idea for the film came initially from a dream, so it's nice that you felt that watching it. But I had this dream about following a girl through some streets and like never quite being able to reach her and touch her or see who she was, and she never turned around. It's just this kind of girl with red hair walking away from me. And it was quite it sort of struck me at the time, and I wrote just that simple idea into a short film years ago, like 8-9 years ago. And I took that short film onto a screenwriting lab. And at the time I thought I was straight. I'd never had any other ideas about my sexuality, and I was in a relationship with a man. And I went on the screenwriting lab, and this guy came up to me on the first day, and we'd all read each other's work, but I'd never met him before. And he was like, "Oh, so you're a lesbian then?" And I was really surprised and like didn't know what he was talking about. And he'd read the script as a sort of about female desire and lesbian desire. And that wasn't at all my reading, and it wasn't my reading of my dream. And I thought he was really weird and maybe trying to come on to me, and I like didn't speak to him for the rest of the week and like went about my thing, writing what I thought was a straight piece of writing. And then things shifted in my life, and like 5 or 6 years later, I came out. And I looked back at that experience and what he'd said to me, and wondered if he'd been right, and that somehow I had written my unconscious desires into a piece of writing years before they'd risen to the surface and become conscious. And I was really interested in that process, so I went back to that piece and started developing it further, and looking at how we can hide ourselves from ourselves and the consequences of that, and how, the film for me is all about fear and desire, and where those two things meet and interrupt each other and have a conversation. That was kind of how the story came about. And you mentioned the sea and the caravan park, the setting really, and the dream I'd had was I was walking through a foreign town in like, I don't know, Italy or somewhere that would have been really nice to film. But then when I started writing the script, we had I got onto a sort of a low budget filmmaking sort of scheme where with the BFI and Creative England, they help support the writing. But because Creative England was funding it, it had to be shot in England. So it couldn't even be Wales or Scotland or anywhere that felt a bit different in any way. It had to be England. So my sort of dreams of shooting in Italy disappeared. And I had to find somewhere that I still wanted it to feel other, or this sort of isolated place where her coming in, she would be very much an outsider, and there was a close-knit community there. So a caravan park sort of felt right. And then I was really interested in how, caravan parks are often in these areas of great natural beauty. And you've got something like, in our film, the sea and these like miles and miles of sand dunes. And it's this kind of raw, natural place. And in juxtaposition with this very prefabricated little sort of fake town and fake community in a way. And to me, that expressed the sort of the main journey of the character of her decision to follow her natural desires and her instincts, or to live this kind of, square cutter type life. So it was exciting to me as a filmmaker once I'd had the idea of shooting there. Then we visited every caravan park in Cornwall, Devon, Dorset, and ended up shooting at the first one we viewed. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the kind of imagery of the sea, and that felt really symbolic that she kind of visits that kind of 3 times, and it feels very much about kind of confronting her fear. And the second time, I really got the sense that she almost wanted to surrender and be overwhelmed by this kind of larger power at play, and also the power of, I think we see her sexuality, her sexual encounters with her boyfriend feel so different, and in these kind of restrained, quite limiting spaces, and almost quite performative, and acting out what is kind of seen as I guess for the male gaze, that's sexy or sexual, in comparison to her then wanting that kind of the sea representing that space and the freedom, and and a more of a natural, as you said, force.
Yeah, it was nice playing with those ideas. I mean, they're certainly not original ideas. Like, the sea has been used to represent sexuality for centuries. So I was aware that, there is a sort of element of it, or a risk that it would feel cliched to sort of use the sea as to express this part of herself, or to sort of, show her fears. But to me, it felt natural and important because I found when I began writing, I was looking back at little pieces of stuff I'd written as I was coming out, sort of exploring how much was unconscious or conscious. And I'd found something I'd written that was just about, I don't write a diary, but occasionally just jot things down. And it was trying to describe this feeling. And I think it was at a point where I knew there was something going on inside me, and that it was important. And I'd written that it felt like I was completely full of water, and at some point it was just going to rise up and overflow and ruin everything and flood the sort of world I'd made for myself, which is pretty much what happened. But yeah, so that feeling of water, and there's images in the film which we shot sort of with a drone over the sea, and you see the wave like building under the surface. I really wanted to try and sort of express that feeling.
Yeah, I think that really came across. And I feel like as well, the sea has a really feminine energy. And quite often we see these like coming of age stories set by the sea, or like with water being a really big part of it. And I think that gelled so nicely with this story. And I think with it being set in Cornwall as well, Cornwall has like this really unique feel to it because it's really vast and huge, but also very isolated. So yeah, I really felt that kind of, yeah, it was interesting. It must have been interesting to play with that kind of thing of being isolated in a place that feels so unwieldy and massive. Did
you grow up in Devon?
Yeah, I grew up in Devon.
Because you mentioned Plymouth in your beautiful film. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's interesting how many of us are sort of drawn to the sea, and how it's, you can find peace in something that is so unwieldy and strange to us.
Yeah, it was interesting how obviously when I was watching your film, I was thinking about people watching it in next back to back with mine, but your discussion about makeup and that scene where you're sort of putting on eye makeup very impressively.
Thank you.
But yeah, it was really interesting that you had brought that up, because obviously it's the title of my film, and it was always something that was important. I liked the idea of trying to show, in showing her relationship with these quite, very feminine sort of stereotypical images of a display of femininity, like long nails, the wigs, the lipstick on the mirror, and how at different points in the film they can feel terrifying to her, or appealing, attractive, and at the end quite empowering, and at other points sort of suffocating, and where she peels nails off. And I was kind of interested in that relationship, and how at different points it can, and for different people, these tropes can feel different. And I sort of wonder what you thought about that.
Yeah, definitely. That scene with the nails, all of them, not just the nail ripping off, but that whole kind of this really vibrant colour being put on someone who, the colours that we associate with her so far are very cool, very calm. And just these things that we put on, and the different kinds of femininity, I think is really interesting to play with, the interplay between Ruth and Jade. And, there's, I think, especially when you're young, if you're a young person and you don't necessarily adhere to the femininity that's presented to you, there's a real pressure to, put that on and try that out. And one of the scenes that really, really stood out to me that I really loved was when they're like dancing together and smoking and drinking. And that whole scene for me just felt so evocative. Like I knew how that caravan smelled and the feel of it, and that just like prickly warmth of being with someone that you really gel with and you really love, and also being like slightly too drunk. When she went and threw up in the toilet, I was like, I've totally been there. I just loved that. And that scene for me, along with the placing of the makeup, it was like the growth of their relationship and them sort of giving different things to each other, and those kind of personas that we put on. And I think the thing is as well with those two, trying on the wigs and putting the makeup on and the nail varnish on, it's not just this is how I'm going to present now, it's the process of actually moving over to that other persona, if you know what I mean. Like the process of putting on a wig or putting on someone else's makeup is such an intimate act. Like, I really loved those moments between them. And now I wanted to ask you as well if there are any sort of particular scenes in the film, any particular moments that you just are so happy how they turned out, or you're really proud of, that maybe you don't get to talk about that often. Because I think quite often when we create something, there'll be like a tiny thing that you're like, oh yeah, that's great.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just about getting to the point where I can watch it without sort of feeling, I don't know, like harassing myself over all of the things that I didn't do or should have done, or didn't come out as I'd imagined them. But I'll have a think about it. I mean, I think the main thing really was Molly's performance. You know, when you're making something so personal, it's always a risk of like who do you cast, who's going to come on this journey with you. And Molly like jumped in with both feet, and within like a week she knew the script better than I knew it, and she would ask me questions about things, and I'm like, I can't even remember writing that. Like she sort of took hold of my sort of dream and story and ran with it and did it, you know, beautifully. So that was, I think, probably I know it's not one moment, but that was kind of what I was amazed and very pleased with. I think there was one question that someone said of where was it shot? But it was shot in Cornwall, but it was St Ives Bay, which is just a beach just up from St Ives near Hale.
There's a couple of questions. Raya says, first of all, I loved the film. The setting you choose was so hauntingly beautiful. I was wondering why you chose to sort of blend together themes of self-discovery and coming of age with the horror. I hadn't seen that combination before, and I thought it was a really interesting choice.
I think that the idea for that, it didn't sort of come out of an idea of a sort of formal idea of I'm going to make a coming of age genre mishmash. It came more from remembering how scary it was for me when I came out and trying to express those fears. And in doing that, the film is very internal and describes, you know, the interior life of this character, which is really a much more kind of novelistic type of thing to try. And in film, the challenge of the script was always, how am I going to externalize that journey and show it visually and cinematically? So I started in sort of thinking constantly about that. I started to sort of shift more into a surreal visualization of the film, which is where like some of the images of the sea come in, and the little dream sequence and the colors and things. But I think the horror stuff grew in that as well, because it was quite a fun thing to express, and there's obviously, you know, a whole genre there to use and play with. So it sort of grew really out of trying to express her inner feelings, but then it kind of became its own thing almost.
Yeah, in part it kind of, I guess with the red coming throughout as well, with the production design, kind of made me think a bit of Don't Look Now, and that kind of the figure in the red coat. And for me, I really liked that it spoke to that kind of I mean, I think there was so much tension almost straight away, but just that kind of that I really liked when you see like that kind of idea of trying to chase something, but you never quite get to see her face, and actually what she's kind of chasing is herself, or her authentic self, but that kind of, you know, grappling with that confusion and that, like, in terms of bisexuality and, like, you know, close friendships and, like, what is this more? Is this, you know, like, I think with women we tend to have potentially more tactile, closer friendships anyway, so I think it can feel more confusing, and it's like, and I guess those ideas of do I want to be her? Do I want to be with her? And I guess at the beginning there's this kind of suggestion that maybe she's this person that maybe Tom, is her boyfriend's name Tom? Yeah, is kind of maybe cheating on her with, but actually it's, so yeah, I think for me it really spoke to those kind of confusing, conflicting feelings.
Yeah, there was a line in Malaika's poem, if I could call it a poem, I feel it was, where I think he said something like, along those same lines of like, or is it someone I could be? You can probably remember it much better than I can.
I should be able to, but I can't remember any of it. But yeah, I think especially if you're a young person anyway, there's so many different versions of the person that you want to be, and then also so many different versions of yourself. And then when you have influence of other people that you really respect, it all gets sort of in this big muddle. And I think for a lot of queer people as well, there are so many different ways of being queer that are presented to us that we feel we should be able to encompass to be like proper, to be perceived as being queer enough, of being like gay enough, bisexual enough, all of these things. And I think sometimes if someone comes into your life in the way that Jay does with Ruth, it's like, oh, okay, this is one version of a person that I could be. Maybe I can take things from this person, and that will help me to figure out what it is that I'm presenting to the world, that kind of thing. But yeah, I wanted to ask you as well about the relationship between Ruth and Tom, because there was a lot of love there. That's something that really struck me, especially at the beginning. There's a real closeness. They've been together since they were kids, basically, and the relationship wasn't like completely negative. And I wanted to ask you about that experience of writing, because I think it could have been so easy to just make Tom a complete asshole, but you kind of fought that, and I think that worked really well. But I wondered, how that process was of writing him and writing a relationship coming to its conclusion naturally for people who are so young, because we've seen that kind of story before, but not for people who are so young. So how did you find that?
Well, I kind of, although he was probably the character I was least interested in the film and least interested in writing, because it wasn't really where the heart of the story is. But I always sort of looked at him like the victim in this scenario, and I liked the idea that he never cheated on her, and that is very much her journey that she needs to go on. So in thinking about him like that, I sort of, I felt sorry for the guy. And although there are moments where he acts like a bit of an arsehole, like he does lock her in the caravan, I hope that, it comes across that it's because he wants to hold on to her and he doesn't really know how else to do it because he's, 19 and, I suppose I had compassion for him, and I imagine it would be it's a very difficult thing if someone you love chooses someone else, and maybe especially so if they choose someone of another gender, or that they, come out, and because there's nothing you can do about it. However, you can be a better boyfriend, or you can try your hardest, but I don't know, it's not going to help. So yeah, I felt sorry for him, and so tried to write him a bit compassionate, although he is, he does watch TV every night and eat quite boring meals, so he's not perfect either.
Yeah, a lot of like plain pasta.
Yeah.
Which I loved. That was really good. I really like food and film, and also like it gave me a real flashback to Bait, the scene in Bait where they're making pasta. I was like, oh, that's such a classic teenage thing to cook, especially like teenage boys cooking pasta.
It's definitely what I lived on until sort of my mid-20s.
The Q&A.
We might have already answered this already, Tom. I guess just following on from the last question. To me, the film had a really interesting, strong sense of horror. I almost half expected a body to turn up. Where did that come from, and why do you think that was so strong?
Yeah, I think I sort of answered that already, hopefully.
Yeah.
If I haven't, Tom, then write again. But I'm not sure how else to really, talk about the horror. Yeah, I think it just sort of ran away with me, really, because it was quite fun, and it was fun shooting those scenes.
And Mia says, thank you so much for this film. It really resonated with me. I was struck by the sense of anxiety and impending doom that Ruth starts to feel with the creepy surroundings. Could you talk a bit more about how the mood was developed and the lighting and cinematography?
Yeah, so I worked with a DOP, Nick Cook, who's brilliant, and we didn't really look at many other films for references, and we really just looked at one photographer, a guy called Todd Hiddo, and he's an American photographer who mostly photographs suburbia, and it's sort of always at twilight, and there's like mist in the air, and there's maybe one light on in a window, and it's got this very atmospheric feel to it. And he did this whole series of photographs where he returned to the town that he grew up in and took photographs there. So there's a sense of nostalgia and like something lost, perhaps. And the way that he describes it is that he's questioning, is a place a state of mind? Can a place be a state of mind? Or can a state of mind be a place? And I was really interested in that idea and how we could sort of mold the environment to reflect Ruth's state of mind through the film, which again is how the horror ties in. So when she's fearful, a storm strikes and it's dark, and when she meets Jade, it's sunset and it's pink sky, and so we had a very flexible schedule so that we could work with the weather, which was tricky for everyone, but we were quite a small crew and we only had one location, so we could kind of move around a little bit. If it was going to rain, we could shoot the scenes with Tom in the sort of dull grey light, and if it was going to be nice, we could shoot other scenes. So that was partly how we addressed the lighting of it. It was low budget, so we didn't have many lights. There's a lot of natural light, but the night scenes we did obviously light. And yeah, just taking inspiration from Todd Hiddo, really. The only other reference that we looked at was a film called Hotel, which is by Jessica Hausner. And I think it was her first film, and it's a sort of exercise in atmosphere, really. And it's about a youngish girl who comes to this very isolated place, this hotel in the middle of nowhere, and gets a job there. So it was quite similar in a lot of ways, and we looked at that quite closely. And she sort of makes a labyrinth out of the hotel, which I was interested in with the caravan park.
And Mia followed up with saying, how important is it that Ruth is away from her home or usual setting in the film?
I think it's important. I never really questioned that. There were at one point in the script some phone calls with her mum back home, and actually we shot some of those scenes, but I never used them because in the end it felt kind of, I suppose, distracting from the story of her transformation. And I don't know, I think sometimes it's easier to do your transforming away from home and away from the family and people that know one version of you, and you can be a bit freer to explore yourself. And but also the flip side of that is that it can be a scary moment and you don't have that support and love. I think for both of those reasons it was helpful for the script. I liked her feeling alone. The other characters on the park apart from Jade, are quite hostile to her. Even Shirley, the caravan park manager, she's kind of like a matriarch in this world, but quite an uncaring one. And she's not, Ruth does at one point go to her and try and sort of ask for help in a roundabout way, but Shirley just sort of palms her off. So yeah, I think her feeling quite alone was important to me in the story, I guess.
Yeah, I think
well, it's like, oh, sorry, go on.
Yes. Yeah, we talked about, I guess, Ruth's fear, but I guess the other side of that is this kind of what you were saying about the hostility, the mistrust, this distrust of her, and actually I think a fear of her and her sexuality. It's almost like the other people are sensing that something's not quite right, and that kind of comes out, I guess, in this way of almost trying to control her. And we see that literally by Tom shutting her in the caravan, but also there's more subtle, and I think that's something that's comes across so well in actually such a limited dialogue. I think there's just some really great things where it's like I think a line like be careful, like Tom says, be careful when he's talking about Jade. She's got a reputation, and she says, what's the reputation? And there's just slightly like that's not answered. So I think there's this like that lends itself to this like unknown like fear, and like what is that? And when something's intangible, it becomes more scary. And I think the real like the wanting to keep her kind of contained and to not I think there's also a line where she says to Jade, oh, Kai's watching us, and they really, and she's like, I don't care. And that's when they kind of, I guess, there's this breaking free of this. So it really spoke to me of this I guess a male fear of female sexuality and power, and like having agency and really embodying your own power because of where that might lead to. Sorry, Mel, what was you going to say?
Just kind of building on the sense of being somewhere other than home. And I think sometimes when that happens, like when you're completely sort of cast out and, in a place that you're not familiar with, you almost kind of return to your base instincts. Like you go into self-preservation mode. And I think going into those places, like it's really scary that you're kind of acting as your truest self in a way. Like your normal boundaries aren't there anymore, and your normal go-tos aren't there anymore. I think that's another really interesting thing about their pre-existing relationship. You get the sense that when they're home together, they're very insular and just kind of cozy, probably just stay in all of the time. But as soon as that's taken out into a wider context, you sort of become yourself in an unfamiliar place. There's no sort of comforts. You're completely sort of out there on your own. And I think that can be a really formative way of kind of discovering yourself and your desires and how you actually do react to the world when it's outside of your control,
I was just thinking about something that I think I really loved was actually like there's no language that's used about the queerness. Nothing is labelled, nothing is pinned down. It's allowed to just to take on that just kind of the journey goes where it goes, and it's just an exploration, and they give in to creating space for that. So I really liked it. There wasn't any actually any dialogue around like what is this that it is all this kind of interiority, and it's not about making it fixed, or I'm now a lesbian, or I really liked that actually none of that was fixed. I think that was really refreshing to see.
I wanted it to feel like something fundamental in her was changing, but it didn't necessarily mean that it couldn't change again, or I don't know. I mean, I have a sort of confused relationship with labeling myself. I just had to do the census. Have you guys done the census? You should all do the census. But it asks whether you're straight, gay, bi. I think those are the 3 categories. And as a snapshot of one day, it's asking you just like on that Sunday, maybe it's this Sunday or last Sunday, how, and I put lesbian or gay because that's the life I'm leading right now. But, tomorrow or, a week ago, I often feel different about it, or so I don't know. I didn't want to sort of put any labels on her, and also she's so young, who knows what she's going to get up to.
Yeah, that's something that really resonated in Mel's poem as well. I think about being queer and alone and what that means. I know definitely I feel like those feelings of like, oh, I have to be able to justify this by how I'm living my life currently. I know that I have those kind of internal dialogues with myself of like, well, if I'm not in a relationship right now with a woman, then like, am I, can I just call myself? I think
really like beat ourselves up over that stuff a lot, I think, and you can overthink it so much, and it's weird. I talk a lot in Why Does the Sea about the fact that we're kind of, so many queer people are sort of afloat, and so it can feel really, really warm and safe to be able to stamp something and be like, oh yes, I am this thing. But the truth of it is, I think that all of us are just floating about and like bobbing about. I'm a bit this today, I'm maybe that another day, and I think that's okay. And I think we should be able to voice that and explore that without feeling like it diminishes the thing that we have been, or whatever else we're going to be.
I'm just going to go to there's a couple more questions.
Yeah.
I'm just going to come to Elspeth first because it kind of relates to what we were just talking about. Love the film, the uncomfortableness, the tension, beautiful writing. Thank you so much. And after Malaika's beautiful poem film and all the observations about being bisexual, queer, and being single, a stimulating evening. Such a rich and important set of questions and observations. I agree with Rebecca that there are a few labels in your film, Claire, and that's a big strength. Claire, you said it was quite novelistic. Were you tempted to write it as a novel or graphic novel? I suppose I'm asking if you could choose any other medium to express the story, what would it be?
I didn't properly consider it because I'm not a novelist, and I can write for screen, but I think it's a very different skill writing a novel, and I have actually tried it in the past, not successfully in any way. And also I found it such a depressing experience. I spent a year trying to write a novel, and by the end I was just like, I have to stop, otherwise something awful is going to happen, because it's so lonely. Whereas with a film, there are parts where you're, for years in your room, or me in my basement, but ultimately you're collaborating and bringing it to life, and that's very exciting. So I hadn't thought about it. I can't draw, so the graphic novel was out, although that would have been great because I do love graphic novels. But no, I think if I hadn't been able to make it as a film, probably I guess it wouldn't have been out there really. I mean, I like taking photographs. I wish I could paint, but no, it was this or nothing, I think, really, for me. Yeah.
And then we've got a question. Did you have any inspiration for the character of Shirley? she was quite scary and funny at various points, which we enjoyed.
Well, I mentioned before that we visited a lot of caravan parks on our recce's to try and find our location. And in doing that, we met a lot of caravan park managers. And while my producer would be chatting to the managers about, logistical things and how many crew we'd have and this and that, I would sometimes be secretly recording, which is something I do quite a lot. And I don't know, people would start telling their stories, and we'd get chatting to them. And I don't know why caravan parks attract quite eccentric people, but I sort of built the character out of meeting, I don't know, maybe like 40 different caravan park managers. So I had I got to do a lot of research there for Shirley. But yeah, it was fun. I felt, I don't know, the film would have been a bit too serious, I think, without her in there.
She felt very real. I definitely recognised, I remember going to stay at a caravan park near Minehead when we were kids, and there was this little lady who ran it with this bright red hair, massive earrings. I just remember her shuffling around at night with her torch, and she always had biscuits in this sort of apron pocket.
That's a good one. I could have put biscuits on there.
Yeah, I really like the line where you think she's being really profound and saying that the sea is a great healer, and that and then she overcame her fear of dogs. So it's just not what you expect.
Yeah, and Lisa Palfrey, who played Shirley, was just brilliant. And the minute she walked into the audition, she just had us in hysterics. And she had a very firm idea of what the character was. When we did the costume fitting, she would be going through the rail, being no, yeah, she'd wear that at 6 a.m. She'd wear that when she goes to bed. She sort of knew exactly the character. So it was really great working with her. And then she went on and played another caravan park owner just after our film in Sex Education.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was just thinking, yeah, she was.
Yeah, so she got
typecast. I just wondered if you mentioned a bit at the beginning. I just, I guess from thinking more like a filmmaking perspective, I was just wondering about how. So I know you've made a couple of short films before this. So I was wondering, just in very practical terms, how easy it was to get this made. I think you mentioned at the beginning, it was you got some support for a low budget. I think, it feels like such a strong debut.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, I made sort of 4 short films which are available to watch on Curzon. I don't think it costs very much, but they've just recently last month gone up on Curzon as a little package, so you can just watch all 4. And I think there was a gap on the first days of shooting on makeup. I hadn't been on set, I think, for 4 or 5 years since the last short. So in that time, I just really written and hustled and tried to get this made. But we made this in quite a unique way, because the scheme's called iFeatures. For anyone interested, I think it does still run, but in a slightly different way. But when I was doing it, it's a bit like X Factor. You're chosen, and there's 12 teams, and you all write a draft, and then they knock it down from 12 to 8, and then you write another draft, and it goes down to 5, and you write another draft, and it narrows down. It's a terrifying way to write a screenplay. And by the end, there's 3 of you left, and they fully fund your features. So the challenge was sort of keeping those deadlines, keeping hold of my project when you're constantly having to pitch it to other people, or get feedback, and also write what they want, because you want to get through to the next stage. But also we knew the budget from the very beginning, which was $500,000. So, which sounds like a lot, but in film terms, it's nothing really. So the challenge was writing to that budget. So that's why I chose to make a film with one location, because that was going to save us a lot of time, and time is money. So if we weren't going to have to do any location moves, that was going to be really handy. And also we could all stay on site. We could eat on site. There was electricity there. There was a lot of useful things about shooting there. So it was kind of constructed for the budget, for the scheme. So I think a lot of with my next project, I think it'll be a very different process trying to get it financed, because you're trying to piece it together from lots of different sources, and that's quite terrifying because people drop out or you're missing a chunk of money. Whereas with makeup, as soon as it got greenlit, like we knew we were safe and we could just do our own thing. Also, it was a very free way to make a film, and I don't know if I will have that experience again, because the scheme is there for emerging filmmakers to sort of find their voice. So the BFI and Creative England, who finance it, they haven't got an agenda apart from you expressing yourself, which is an amazing way to make a film. Whereas in the real world, there's all sorts of other, people want to get their money back, and there's all sorts of other concerns. It was a very special way to make a film.
Do you have any difficulty in terms of pitching it? Because I think, obviously it has these reference points of different genres, but I think it kind of defies, being labelled as any one of them. And I guess I wonder how much at the forefront the queer narrative was when you were pitching that. And was there any problems with that? And I'm also wondering about how it's been received. Like, I know it was released, you had like a really small window in the summer when it was released in cinemas, with obviously some being open, not all of them. And then it's gone on to the BBC iPlayer. I guess it came on my radar. But I'm just wondering about, I feel like there's probably a lot of, I guess the queerness of it is maybe something that's hidden. And I'm just wondering about how different audiences might access it. So that was really...
so the pitching the film was really complicated and no one really understood. It was really hard to it was a really hard film to put into words. There was no, I didn't have any snappy pitches. It was always like, people were like, so what are you making? I'm like, don't ask me that question. But because of the way we made it, and the exec producers and funders were kind of with the project from its birth, they kind of got it as we went along. And I don't know if the film would have got made outside of that system, because it is a difficult film to pitch. And even once it had been made, it's a hard film to position. Curzon, I think, did a great job of it. But, there was all these decisions with the trailer of how much do we flag that it's a gay film? Because obviously that's where some of our audience lies. So we want to make sure it gets to those people, but at the same time, it gives away a major plot point, the plot point of the film. So I was worried that, it's a different experience watching the film knowing that it's a gay film than watching it where you know nothing about the film, and it sort of, there are all these red herrings and it takes you on this journey, which was always my intention, because I wanted the audience's experience to reflect the experience of Ruth in the film, and she doesn't know what's happening for a majority of the time. But they reassured me that it still resonates, even if you watch it knowing what's going to happen to this girl. And And I think in the trailer's great, and they did a good job, I think. And it, like, for the people who know, I think they recognize that it's a queer film. And maybe the people who, like, aren't looking out for those signs wouldn't see it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, also when we were pitching it, my producer Emily Morgan was always having to say, like, who are the audience for this film, and we were always like, women, skewing towards women, like 25 to 40, younger women, and a lot of the very positive response from the film has been, like, from men over 40, and I've been really surprised by that. And it's been really nice, and people have been very supportive, particularly critics. I mean, a lot of the critics are men over 40, but they've been kind. So, yeah, it's sort of, I guess these things, after a while, take on a life of their own and surprise you in different ways. Does that answer all of your questions?
Yeah, definitely. Because for me, I guess it's back to that, not pinning anything down. And the fact that it is almost undefinable is, for me, is the strength and what makes it such a unique film. So I think, definitely I saw it, and I'd been wanting to see it, but it didn't come out in a cinema in Bristol. So, and then when I saw it going on to BBC, and I was like, I want everyone needs to see this film. And a queer audience needs to see this film.
No, it's great that it's on BBC. And we did have, your other part of the question was the release. I mean, I was really happy with it. The plan was always July, and then COVID happened, and we just stuck with our plan. And we kind of got lucky that by July, some cinemas were open. And, I went to the opening night in the cinema in the Curzon Mayfair, and it was like a private screening. Like, my group of friends was like the only people there. But, so it was at a moment where people were, I think, worried about going back into cinemas, and a lot weren't open. But it traveled around a bit, and it's still playing festivals around the world, a lot of gay festivals, queer festivals. So, yeah, I think it's getting out there. For a small film, I think it is getting out there, really thanks to Curzon. I can see a question here. What was the relevance of the character of April to the story? That's an interesting one. I mean, the idea for April's sort of story within the film, I wrote one of the drafts while staying on the caravan park. And while I was writing, one day, all of these police helicopters and sort of sea rescue service came in and sort of flooded the park, and they were knocking around caravans, and this old man had gone missing, and he had Alzheimer's, and they were worried he'd wandered out into the dunes or into the sea, and they didn't know where he was. And this search with dogs and everything went on for hours and hours. And eventually they found him in the caravan next door. He just got confused and gone into the wrong caravans. He was fine. But it gave me the idea of, I knew I wanted to have a storm and sort of it to be eventful and people out and about, but that kind of gave me the idea of somebody going missing and this sort of search party. And someone said to me that they felt that the character of April somehow represented the possibility of Ruth's older self if she didn't follow her instincts and her desires. Might she end up sort of digging her own grave in the sand as April does. I hadn't sort of deliberately created it like that, but it was a nice observation that someone had made.
For me, I think it kind of brought parallels, I guess. Kind of knowing how dementia, works, and those slippages of memories, and what's true, what's not, and different selves. like, to me, that it just made me also just spoke to, I guess, Ruth's experience as well, that in that place that nothing is quite what it seems and everything's, so for me, that was just another kind of layer. We're just coming up to nearly 10 o'clock. So does anyone have any last questions or comments?
I wanted to ask you, Claire, just sort of stepping away from makeup, and I'm just curious to know what you're excited for in cinema and what you'd like to see more of in cinema in the coming sort of years.
Oh God, that's a big question. Well, I've got lots of friends who are like eager and waiting to shoot their features, a lot of them first features, that have been delayed. So I'm very excited for all of those films, and a lot of women, female filmmakers. I'm part of a group called Cine Sisters, which is a group of female directors, and so there's a lot of people in that group who are sort of about to make their first films or second films. So yeah, new voices, new cinema, and that always excites me. I mean, I am a big fan of queer cinema, and I think it's partly because it sort of obviously resonates to me personally, but also because it's often sort of, it's not often made in Hollywood. It's sort of, a different independent voices, and I think anything that is different and independent and new, I'm excited about, wherever that comes from. And I know that the BFI and the BBC and some of these, big public organisations have done like a huge push in the last few years to find underrepresented voices, whether they be female or ethnically diverse or sexually diverse, or so there's been like a huge push. So it'll be exciting seeing all of those films come through, because there's always takes 5 years delay from when people kind of go out and try and make something. It obviously takes time. So yeah, it'll be exciting to see all those new British voices. What about you?
Yeah, same really. I think what's really exciting is seeing people who maybe have unconventional paths into filmmaking and their voices being more subversive and given bigger platforms and more distribution, things like that. I think Rocks was an example of how
I love that film.
Powerful and how exciting and fun that can be when people are allowed space to tell their own stories and create a film in a really different way. So yeah, that's what I'm excited for.
And what about in poetry, which is a world I don't know that much about? I've just read Poor. Have you read?
I don't know.
It's a book that came out recently.
Caleb Femi.
Yeah.
Yes, no, I do know that. Yeah, I love Caleb.
Peckham Estate. But yeah, they're exciting. What's next for you?
So I am currently in rehearsals for a show that I wrote called Outlier, which is going to be on mid-June, fingers crossed, at Bristol-based for a 2-week run. It's like a nice autobiographical story about growing up in rural Devon, about addiction and friendship and things like that. And hopefully there's going to be a live stream of it as well. So that's my next thing. And that's spoken words and music. I perform it with a band. Poetry's in a cool place. I'm just really interested to see what this period of isolation and lots of self-reflection stuff is going to do to creative voices. And, I think people are hopefully going to step out of it and really have a completely new idea and version of themselves. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see how that affects their writing and performance and what they create.
Oh, well, I look forward to your show. I'm going to try and go, I hope.
Yay! Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Claire, for joining us, and Mal for sharing your piece and being with us as well. It's really great to talk to you, and so glad we could do this. Really love the film, Claire. So I look forward to seeing what comes next.
Great. Well,
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks
Thanks for
everyone.
joining us, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.